In the middle, you'll see this is remnants of an archaeological dig that they did, and they discovered their actual temple at Har Gerizim. Okay, so it's pretty wild. And on the bottom right, you could see what archaeologists think it looked like. So it's pretty wild, right? Now, what's interesting also in the Samaritan Bible, every time that it says for us, Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, right, the place that God will choose, which we always understood as Yerushalayim, they actually read it differently. They read it as Hamakom Asher Bachar Hashem, the place that God already chose, because he chose it here in our text as Har Gerizim. All right, like it's known to everyone. God chose it. So this like tiny little, difference of taking away that yud changes the whole meaning. They also have a different version of the Aseret HaDibrot that I put here. Okay, so starting on the top right, I kind of did it in the order of Hebrew. Some of it sounds similar. You shall have no other gods, right? Observe Sabbath, honor your father and mother, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony, do not covet your neighbor's house, do not covet your neighbor's wife. And then the 10th commandments, which clearly stands out, just look at the size of it. I mean, it's so crazy, is exactly our text. That when God brings you to the land, you're going to inherit, and you're going to set up stones and plaster them with plaster and write all these laws on them and build an altar to God. And I mean, it's literally our text, right? Which is wild, because I don't know, until I really studied Sefer Devarim in depth, I've never thought of these psukim as being so important, right? But here they have made the top 10 for the Samaritans. That's how important it was for them to establish that their central location was in Har Gerizim. What to make of this? What to make of the fact that we have two different texts? Well, there's a lot of scholarly debates over which Bible came first and which is more authentic, right? And we don't know. It's unclear. Some contend that since the Samaritans already had a Bible, had a temple on Har Gerizim, it was a Judaic writer who had to come and erase Gerizim from our text, right? In order to put in Har Eval, in order to delegitimize the Samaritan tradition. And then there are others who say that no, the Samaritans actually came and changed their text in order to reflect their reality that they had. We will never know the answer to this, but I think it's really interesting as we read it to be aware of the different versions and how it's understood throughout the ages and how Jews today and Samaritans read this text. Okay, now following, so let's just go back for a second. Following, hold on. So we did the ceremony, okay, what you have to do. And then once you're standing in Har Gerizim and Har Eval, then we have these series of arur. That means curse, 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 but these aren't curses, okay? This is, you're cursed if you do X, Y, and Z. That's not a curse, okay? That's just telling you what you can't do. So these are the top 12, right, most important things that they cannot go over, lest they be cursed. And what are they? It's a really interesting group. You cannot make a idol and worship it in secret. You cannot dishonor your parents. You can't remove your neighbor's boundary, like, just play with your backyard. You can't lead the blind astray. You can't exploit anyone who's vulnerable, like the stranger, the orphan, or the widow. You can't lie with your father's wife. You can't commit bestiality. You can't commit incest. You can't kill someone in secret. You can't get paid to kill someone. And then at the very, very end, you can't do anything bad, right? You have to keep all of these mitzvot, everything, the catch-all. So I want you to look at these for a minute, think about them, reflect on it, and tell me anything that stand out. What connects these all together? Any words that stand out? Anything interesting that's missing from it that you thought might be here? Or do these all fall into one theme or one category?
There are things that affect other people. They're not
Exactly.
just personal covenants.
Exactly. This is really all about the sanctity of the family and the community, right? Not about ritual. And what's important is that these are all things that could be done in secret away from the community's eyes, right? Most people are motivated to do good because they're always looking over their shoulders and thinking, what will my neighbor say? I don't want to be embarrassed. That's what keeps people within a moral code. As sad as it is, it's the reality. And here we're saying, Moshe saying, there's a lot of stuff that happens inside the home or that people don't know about, right? Sexual exploitation, dishonoring parents, leading the blind astray. The blind will never know they were led astray. Exploiting vulnerable people. They might not even know that you're doing it. And all these things, and killing someone in secret. Look at that word, baseter. I highlighted it with yellow. That's the common theme here. Seter is a secret. And I think the message here is really powerful, right? We're saying, no, God is watching. It's not just about our societal laws, right? God will know and will curse you. And that's a really important reminder that Moshe has to give in order to make sure they understand that this treaty that they are signing isn't public, it's also private. Now, there's one here that I think really does not fit in, and that is the last one, right? Because we have very highly specific curses here. And then the last one is, and if you don't do any of the mitzvot in the whole Torah. Well, why not just start with that, right? Why go through 11 specific ones if you're just going to give one really general one at the end saying all mitzvot? Then there's no point of giving any of those. Furthermore, is it actually possible not to transgress against all mitzvot? I mean, please, you're saying that anyone who doesn't do any of the mitzvot, they're going to be cursed? Hold on, wait 1 second.
Mommy,
I was teaching you. Okay, sorry. She has a dance recital, sorry. So, right, it's impossible. No. Yes, lock the door. It's impossible. Someone's going to transgress one of the mitzvot and they can't get cursed. You can't have this catch-all phrase. This leads a lot of scholars to speculate that perhaps a later editor came and added in that last pasuk there that I put in bold, because it really doesn't fit and it kind of ruins the flow and the entire motif, right? And this later editor wanted to be super religious. He wanted you to know, keep everything in the whole Torah. In a way, I actually think that backfires, right? In what way? I don't think it's a helpful arur. Why? What happens when you tell someone you have to keep every single one of these mitzvot? What does it do?
It frees you to not keep every one of them because it's impossible.
Exactly.
So you're off the hook.
You're off the hook because once you go against one of the mitzvot, you're like, oh, well, I guess I'm cursed anyway. I might as well chuck them all out. So I think that the original text, by going into such details, right, is actually helpful because it's telling you what are the top ones, what are the ones that we really, really care about. Okay. Then after we find out what all these stipulations are, after that, okay, hold on, I went too far. Hold on a second, don't look. Here we go. After that, we have really long prakim. I mean, it's huge, listing all the blessings and all the curses. I didn't put them all down because it was so long. And you could probably even guess, right? All the blessings is going to be, you're going to be fruitful and you have a lot of wealth and overabundance and respect in the world and leadership, and everyone will recognize God. All the great things the Torah talks about. And if not, all the curses, you're going to have disease and crop failure and natural disasters and military defeats and starvation and depression and sieges and children dying and mothers eating their children, right? Anything. So basically anything good or bad that happened to a person in life, you could find in these prakim. That's the idea here, that you go through your life and anytime there's a catastrophe, right, you find it. I can't even think of one bad thing that it's not in this section. And in this sense, catastrophe becomes a form of revelation, right? Because God is always telling you if you're doing something good or bad. So everything that happens to you in life takes on a theological meaning to it. Now, I can't tell you that I ascribe to this theological message, but I'm explaining, at least from the perspective of the author in Devarim, how they view the world. And it means also that God is restrained by this system. God cannot just be arbitrary. He needs to follow his side of the deal, where if you're doing good, you have to get rewarded. And if you break the treaty, then he's allowed to punish you. But he does not have freedom. Okay.
I think this is a beautiful, sorry to jump in, Sarah.
Go.
I think this is a beautiful and really important point, and that is, this is the definition of a Brit. A Brit is a two-sided relationship where both people are now going to be coming into a relationship as active partners in that relationship. So yeah, God is able to punish the people because they're now invested in this relationship, and God is going to reward the people. So there's very much a two-sided aspect to what Brit is, the very definition.
Exactly, 100%. Now, who is the intended audience of these curses and blessings? We've been talking about this throughout our learning together, that we always have two audiences. We have the narrative audience and the literary audience. Okay, the narrative audience are Bnei Israel standing in Moab with Moshe on the day that he's going to die, hearing these curses and blessings. And for them, they're being warned about the future. So this is almost a scare tactic. This is either supposed to motivate them or scare them. But there's also the literary audience, and that's us today. And that's also people living in the 6th and 7th century BCE. And for them, they actually lived through the fall of the Northern Kingdom, the siege of Sancherib around Jerusalem, right? The assault from Assyria. And so for them, this is also a way for them to explain their own lived history that they just experienced. So when they hear these words, and as so many of the descriptions of the curses resonate with them, for example, mothers eating their children, right? What comes to mind is Echa, Lamentations, that we read on Tisha B'Av, where we have that horrible imagery, right? And I think that there's like a parallel there. You're supposed to think of that. And for them, like, it doesn't make them feel better, but it might explain things, and it might say that you're at fault and that you could repair this relationship if you follow the treaty again. So we always have to keep both of those audiences in mind.
Excuse me, Sarah, is thinking of the audience. Could you please mute everybody because there's background chatter?
Yeah, Mark, are you going to do that? Can you do that?
Mark,
Great.
could you please? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gloria. Another interesting element to the curses that's sometimes overlooked, okay, since we're not reading them inside, I'm just picking out a few, is God's going to give you a dever and shchin and more shchin, and you're going to become blind, and then you're going to get arba, and you're going to go back to Mitzrayim, right? Clearly, this is the imagery of the Eser HaMakot. And, right, the imagery is supposed to like send these shock waves through the reader of like, oh, we're going back to Mitzrayim, right? This is like a reversal of the Exodus. But why use the imagery of Mitzrayim? Why is it so effective? What is the device here? Why is Moshe telling them that you will get punished just like the Mitzrayim got punished? Anyone want to throw out an idea?
Well, one of the things I see is that because we were witness to it, rather than having it done to us, there is you're up close and personal without being affected, but now you could be as well.
Right. So we like understand the tragedy and the devastation, 100%. I think also it's important to also think about what Mitzrayim represents in the Bible. And Mitzrayim has been used over and over again to as a paradigm of arrogance and inflation. That's why I put the bread there. Chazal like to say that Mitzrayim is like lechem, and we should be like matzah, right? And chametz and matzah. So like yeast rises. And Micha Goodman writes that Moshe's main theme throughout Sefer Devarim has been warning them of their own success. Right? If they become too wealthy, they're going to forget God. And Mitzrayim represents that wealth, that affluence. They're a country that has the Nile. They don't have to pray for rain, right? They symbolize great might. They're a great empire. Paro thought he was divine. So the more that you take on Egyptian culture, then God will treat you like the Egyptians, right? So I think when you see these curses, it's not just that God's going to curse you in the way he cursed them. It's because you've become them. You've embodied their values. And that has been one of the greatest messages in Sefer Devarim. When you go into the land, don't forget God. Don't think that you are the ones who are succeeding at everything. We'll see that theme over and over again. Okay. Moshe, is now going to address what changes Bnei Israel are going to go through once they cross that Yarden and they finish with that stage of life of being in the Midbar for 40 years and they become an independent nation in their own lands. And it's very strange what he says, okay? He starts off by saying, Atem re'item et kol asher asa Adonai le'einechem be'eretz Mitzrayim Liparo l'chol lavadav l'chol artzo hamasot hagdolot asher ra'u einecha hoto v'hamavtum hagdoleila. So you've seen with your eyes over and over again. You've experienced it. You see what God did in Mitzrayim. V'lo natan Adonai lechem lev lada'at ve'einayim lirot ve'oznayim lishmoa ad hayom hazeh. All of this seeing that you've done hasn't gotten you very far because lo natano denai lachem lev ladat, you still didn't know God until this day, meaning right now when he's doing this treaty with them and they're about to cross into the land. Now,
this generation wasn't in Egypt. This generation wasn't in Egypt. They didn't see anything.
They didn't see anything. Thank you. Number one, they weren't there, but he's speaking to them as if they were there. Right? Number two, what does that mean that none of this had an impact on them? 40 years in the Midbar, let's say hearing it from your parents or experiencing the Nisim in the Midbar, and it hasn't done anything for you? Like, I don't know, if I was living in the Midbar, that might, right, forge a sort of connection with God. We've seen the word re'eh over and over again in Sefer Devarim. Seeing. It's been a major theme of ours, right? You saw things in Egypt. You saw what God did at Baal Peor. You didn't see anything in Matan Torah. You only heard God, right? And all this seeing didn't do what it was supposed to do. Had no impression. Hearing is also repeated over again. Shema Yisrael, right? L'shmoa, over and over again. Teach your children, hear it. And there's no doubt that hearing is better than seeing, but even hearing also has its limitations. In fact, at Matan Torah, they hear God. And remember that we read that they have this whole freak out where they said, oh no, we're going to die. Moshe, you have to be our intermediary. We can't hear them. And they think they're going to die. But in fact, they don't get the one lesson that they were supposed to learn, which is that they heard God's voice and they didn't die. Right? Like they were alive. They were able to say to Moshe, we heard God's voice. And they don't trust their own hearing. And here, I think what Moshe is saying, okay, is that you will never again hear God's voice. The act of divine hearing has ended. And there's now a new divine will. And that new will is to remember and to act. Divine revelation cannot be counted on as a source of inspiration or loyalty. It didn't work. It's not a solid foundation for faith, right? Because up until now, they've seen and heard God, and yet they keep on forgetting God. So going forward, Moshe is saying, Ad hayom hazeh, until today, what's going to change? Well, going forward, we need something much more powerful, much more foundational than seeing and hearing. And that's going to be creating ritual in order to recreate our historical narrative that you pass down to your children. That's the Shema, teaching, talking, right? Reenacting everything. So it's a really powerful message, and Moshe spells it out very clearly in these psukim about how he intends their religious lives to look after he passes. This idea of Ad Hayom Hazeh, until today, keeps on coming up. I just gave you some examples in Perek Chavtet where I highlighted Hayom, 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 Hayom. I didn't bother with the next Perek, which has another 7 Hayoms. It's like so clear that this is one of the most important words, okay? But why? What is the rhetorical function of this word Hayom today? Why the constant reminder that he's talking to them Hayom? Obviously, he's talking to them Hayom. It would be as if I keep on saying, guys, I'm giving you this class today. And today I'm going to be speaking about this. And today we're going to be learning this Perek Chavtet. Why? Why does he keep on saying Hayom, 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 Hayom?
Because the laws are not just there for historical value. They're there for, it's an act of participation, of buy-in. So
Yes. So Gloria, that is speaking to the literary audience. So when I read that, when I read Hayom today and I'm reading the text, I am reading it as my Hayom, right? Moshe is speaking to me today, right now. That draws me into the text. It makes me a participant. I'm not a reader. I'm an active participant. I feel like Moshe is speaking to me. It's a really powerful tool that Moshe uses. And for the people listening to it literally on Hayom, I imagine that if someone's on their deathbed and they know they're about to die in a few hours and they say, today is my last day in Hayom, well, you're going to listen. There's a sense of urgency, right? You are drawn into that person and you want to hang on to every one of their last words. So this Hayom becomes something that's imprinted in their heads forever. They're never going to forget this Hayom, ever. It's a very, very powerful tool that Moshe uses. In the next few prakim, which we're not going to look at inside, Moshe focuses on the fact that they will sin, they're going to get punished, but don't worry, you could do tshuva and you could return to Hashem. And the reason, the mechanism that you could return to God is because, these are my favorite psukim, by the way, Hi ha-mitzvah hazot asher anochi mitzavcha hayom lo nifleit hi mimecha v'lo rechokahi. These mitzvot, they're not too hard for you and they're not far away. Lo bashamayim hi, they're not up in heaven. Lemor, that someone shall say, Mi ya'aleh lanu hashamayim v'yichehu lanu. Right? Oh, someone go up to the skies and bring us down the law. Lo mi'ever leyamhu, and it's not across the sea that someone will say, go across the sea and bring us the law. Ki karov elecha hadavar. It is near you. It's reachable. Right? Me'od. It's very close to you. Bepicha o bilvavecha la'asoto. It's on your heart. So the plain reading of this text is, how can we access God? How do we renew the brit? And the answer, according to these words, right, are, well, you know everything. It's right here. There's no esoteric knowledge in Judaism. Nothing is hidden. Every person has the ability to really reach out their hands and access this Torah. We don't need anyone else, and we don't have to search very far. Okay, so that to me is a very powerful level. I have to quickly raise one story in the Gemara, even though this goes against my entire class. I only like to do the pshat. I like to do the plain meaning, because this phrase, lo b'shamayim hi, was used famously in one of the most incredible midrashim in the Gemara. Okay, I'm going to tell the story really, really quickly. Basically, there was an oven that became impure, and there was a big disagreement between Rabbi Eliezer, who said that you could make it pure again, and the other rabbis who said that you can't. And everyone disagreed with him. And he said, well, if I'm right, then let the carob tree jump. And the carob tree jumps. And let the stream of water go flow backwards. And it flows backwards. And let the walls of the Beit Midrash cave in, and the walls start caving in. And let a bat kol come out and say, yes. And finally, a bat kol, a heavenly voice comes and says, guys, the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. No one budges. No one really cares that a divine voice comes down. And Rabbi Yoshua says, nope, lo b'shamayim hi. We don't go, right? We don't go according to the divine voice. We follow the halacha that we come up with in this world. And the Gemara continues and says that Eliyahu, Rabbi Natan met Eliyahu and said, what did God say at that point? And he said that God smiled and said that my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. Like, yes, they're right. Once I give the Torah, it's theirs. So I think it's interesting to see that idea. The rabbis got that out of our psukim here. That's not what the pshat is talking about, but I think that it is touching upon the same very ideas that Moshe is saying, that these things belong to you. There's a sense of ownership. These are your mitzvot, and it's everyone's. Once again, this is what we saw before in the previous section. The Torah doesn't belong to the Kohanim or to the Melech or to the Nevi'im or to the Shoftim. No, every person has a stake, right? It's him democratizing the Torah again. Okay, sorry guys, I'm zipping through the whole Devarim because I really want to finish it to the very, very end. I couldn't skip a lot. After this, okay, you would expect, after this, we have one more mitzvah. But wait a minute, I thought we were done doing mitzvot. Shouldn't that belong in the Torah section? What is Moshe doing? He can't help himself. This mitzvah is really important. It belongs right here. Okay, there's a reason it wasn't in the other section. And it's one last mitzvah that says every 7 years during the year of Shemitah, during the holiday of Sukkot, every single person in all of Bnei Israel have to come to the temple and have to read this Torah, the law book. And it's called Hakel. And look who comes, the Anashim and the Nashim and the Taf and the Geracha, right? Men, women, children, strangers, every person living there needs to come and do this. So this, of course, is reminiscent of Har Sinai, of the entire nation coming together. It's the end of the agricultural year. It happens Sukkot, so no one's running back home. This is kind of the beginning of winter vacation, so people could stay a little bit more. It's during a Shemitah year, so perhaps they have off. And the message here is what we've been saying over and over again. The law is open to everyone, and all citizens have to be educated. You need to go every 7 years and hear these mitzvot, right? It's all about the people. And this ritual is going to be what ensures the perpetuation of the brit, the covenants. It's the only thing. We need to know that everyone, it's almost like signing your name every 7 years, you have to renew it again. Otherwise, you're going to forget about that covenant that your great-great-grandparents told you about. So it's a constant renewal of the brit. And also it ensures that there isn't an abuse of power, right? Because they know the laws and they know the limitations of the Melech and the Shofet and the Navi and right, all the different players and the Kohen. So it keeps all those institutions in check. Now, the next parak is Moshe's farewell address in the form of a poem, Shirat Ha'azinu. It is very archaic, difficult Hebrew. We're not going to read through it. I'm going to give you a general idea, and then we're going to focus on two major problems, okay? What is the poem about? Well, God won Israel, okay? He was like allotted them. They were small, insignificant people. They were in the wilderness, but God brought them up and turned them into a strong nation. Soon they become so great that they get too fat and they leave God and they go and worship other foreign gods. God gets really, really jealous And so he brings down demons and terrible things, and he basically utterly destroys them. Okay. Then he feels a little bad, not because he almost destroyed his people, because God says, what will the other nations think of me? Okay. How will they react to the fact that Bnei Israel are almost destroyed? It makes me look weak. And therefore, he won't totally destroy them. Okay, not very inspiring. It's a very negative poem. I want to focus on one discrepancy that we see between our text, our Masoretic text that we have in our Torah, and between one of the Dead Sea Scrolls found in Qumran and the Septuagint on the left. This was actually my first class that I ever took in graduate school. I was at Revel School at Yeshiva University, and my first class was given by Professor Sid Lyman. And this was literally the first thing I saw. And I remember like my jaw dropped. I had never seen this before or known about these differences. So let's read these psukim together. B'hanchel Elyon goyim, b'hafrido b'nei adam. So when Elyon gave the nations their inheritance and separated the b'nei adam, the different people, Yitzav Gbulot Amim, he set up boundaries. Lemispar b'nei Israel, according to the numbers in b'nei Israel. Ki chelek Adonai Amo, because the chelek of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is his nation. Yaakov, chevel nachlato. Yaakov is the lot of his inheritance. This doesn't make sense. Okay? It doesn't make sense at all. It's saying that Elyon divided up land for all the other nations according to the numbers of Bnei Israel. Why should the numbers of Bnei Israel have any bearing on how other nations are divided up and given their inheritance? And in fact, if we look at the Dead Sea Scroll on the bottom right, we see that their text says, Lemispar Bnei Elohim, not Bnei Yisrael. That's the magenta part. Instead of Bnei Israel, it says Lemispar Bnei Elohim, according to the number of their gods. And if we look in the Septuagint, okay, the Greek version of the Bible, it says according to the number of the angels of God, which flows a lot better and makes a lot more sense in the context of what is happening there. Hang on, okay? So, oh, hold on, I'll just ask you, what is the theological problem for us, at least, in the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scroll? Why would we not have the text that says B'nai Elohim according to the number of gods? Why is that problematic for us?
Because we don't believe there are other gods.
Exactly, right? Because what are we talking about, other gods? There's just one God. We would never have a reference to other gods. Keep that in mind 1 second, okay? We're now going to see another problem. This is the very, very last pasuk, okay? The last pasuk says, Harininu goyim amo, kidam avadav yukam, benakam yashib litzarav, v'chiper admato amo. Okay, sing out loud. This is like praise God, goyim amo, right? The nations of his people, because God avenged the blood of his servants, that's us. So this happens at the end of the whole story. I told you before that God punishes us, but then feels really bad about it. So he ends up punishing the other nations. So then sing out loud, goyim amo, because he avenged the blood of his people. He rendered vengeance to the other people. V'chiper admato amo, and he did a kapara, cleansing of the land of his nation. And in the Septuagint, instead of it saying goyim amo, it actually says the angels of God worship him. Not the goyim, it says angels. This is also theologically troubling because we don't have angels in the Torah. It's not part of our theology. We don't see it in biblical literature. Like maybe a little bit in Yecheskel and some other Svarim, but not really in the Torah. So these problematic theological texts were not lost on ancient scribes who wanted to correct the theology. And so what some scholars speculate is that they changed Bnei Elohim to read Bnei Israel to take away the problem, even though it doesn't flow as well, right? We saw before, it doesn't really make so much sense.
We actually do see Bnei Elohim. We see it right before Noah.
Okay,
When it
so
says that
that
they came
is
down.
the only text, exactly. And that is why the Mefarshim there have to reinterpret Bnei Elohim to say that they're Shoftim, right? They're like important people, they're Nisiim, and they're, right? The Mefarshim are very, very upset about that Bnei Elohim, 100%. And I would say that's the only, and that's probably one of like the most like mythological text in Bereshit, where we have these like God-like angels come down. And we see that a lot in the book of Enoch. It's in a lot of the books in the Apocrypha, which weren't part of the Bible, have these Bnei Elohim. It's probably one of the only things that remained. But yes, that is definitely true. And this author changed it here as well. The angels singing with God now turns into nations singing with God. We also had this other challenge I didn't bring up. Let's go back a second to the slide over here. B'hanchel elyon goyim. Who's this elyon who's giving out portions of land to Adonai, to Yud-Kei Vav-Kei? Right? It makes it almost seem like Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is a god underneath elyon. So our traditional understanding is that we actually say elyon is another name for God. And we call God Kel Elyon, right? We refer to God within our liturgy as Elyon. But if you're reading this for the first time, that's not very clear. It actually looks like Elyon is a different, separate entity than God. So we have all these problems in Shirat HaZinu. And what is the ultimate message of Shirat HaZinu? We're actually not sure. It's really hard to understand. It ends off on this kind of ambiguous note where all the nations are going to sing out to God because God avenged his people. B'chiper adzmato amo. He cleanses, he gives a kapara on the land of his nation. And it doesn't really tell us, like, does Israel survive this? Is there a reconciliation? Does the land just stay barren? Can the people come back? Is there a chance at the Brit being renewed again? We actually have no idea. We don't know. This poem is rather scary and depressing and vague. And we leave off on this note where we're not sure how we're supposed to repair our relationship, which is juxtaposed to the very next parak where Moshe gives these beautiful brachot to the 12 tribes. And it's the complete opposite. They're all positive and inspiring. Now, where else have we seen someone give blessings to his children, to the 12 tribes on his deathbed? Where have we seen that imagery before? With Yaakov, right? The end of Sefer Bereshit. I think it's not a coincidence that the end of Sefer Bereshit and the end of Sefer Devarim both end with a person blessing the 12 tribes. And in both situations, Bnei Israel are about to enter a new territory or a new stage. Yaakov is blessing them before they begin their servitude in Mitzrayim, and they enter that stage. And here, Moshe is blessing them before they enter the lands of Eretz Canaan and their new stage in life. And there's a direct parallel between these. Yaakov's blessings, in fact, are a little negative. I don't know if you remember them. I suggest you go back and read them. They're not so positive. I mean, I would not want to get that blessing from my parent before they pass away. It's pretty harif. And here, Moshe, on the other hand, only gives positive feedback. He's only inspiring them. So why this dichotomy between ha'azinu that we just saw, which was really scary, and then v'zot habracha, which is really positive? It almost looks like two different authors. You can't believe the same person would give the same speech. Why are they right next to each other side by side? Go for it.
Okay, Sarah, it's reminding me of stuff that I learned in psychology, that negative reinforcement or intermittent reinforcement is actually more positive, more powerful than only being positive.
Mhm.
That we have to accept, in human nature, we're going to screw up. And
Right.
the previous slide that you just taught us
Mhm.
it reminds me that God is a great role model for corrective experience. I made a mistake, we get a chance to have a do-over. We have a role model that there's room when we do mess up, that we can correct ourselves. So I'm seeing this very much in terms of when human beings finally develop their superego, that you've internalized what's right and wrong. It doesn't have to come from an external source. So this to me is the climax,
Yes, I completely agree. I think Moshe is being realistic, also aspirational, and he can't leave off on that negative note. If he ended off in the previous parak, well, there's really nothing to push a person forward. He has to end off with this last push of positive, and he needs it to come from the people internally. I completely agree with you. And I think it's important that he writes, Torah tziva lanu morasha kihila Yaakov. This is an inheritance. This is a morasha. This is something that's going to be with you forever, that you're going to pass down to your kids. And I like how you frame that it needs to be something internal and not external. It can't just be the previous parak. We have to build them up as well. 100%. And now we've come to the very, very last stage. This is the saddest part of our book. It's what we've all been waiting for. We knew it was going to happen, and that is Moshe's death. Vaya'al Moshe me'arvot Moav el Har Nevo Rosh HaPisga asher al pnei Yericho. Vayar'ehu Adonai et kol haaretz et hagilad ad Dan v'et kol Naphtali v'et eretz Ephraim v'Menashe v'et kol eretz Yehuda ad hayam ha'acharon v'et Negev v'et kikar b'gat Yericho ir ha'tamarim ad Tzoar. Vayomer Adonai elav zot haaretz asher nishbati la'Avraham liYitzchak u'liYakov le'mor lizarecha etnena v'heri itzcha be'einecha v'sama v'lo ta'avor. Right, and this is again, you could see it, but you can't pass it. Vayama sham Moshe eved Adonai be'eretz Moav al pi Adonai, and Moshe dies. So he dies on top of Har Nevo. Vayikbor Oto Begai Be'eretz Moav Mul Beit Peor. So while he dies on the top of the mountain, they bury him in the valley in Moab, opposite this Beit Peor. Beit Peor is idolatry. It's a temple of Avodah Zarah, and he's buried right opposite it. V'lo yada ish et kavurato ad hayom hazeh. And no one knows where he is buried until today. Okay.
I think the idea of him being buried opposite Beit Peor, where we know that all that atrocity took when the Midianim came.
Yes.
I think that shows us that he's always there for us. He's always going to be there, defending us and making sure that Beit Peor cannot raise their heads again. And that at least is something very positive.
I love that. That's really beautiful. I think we all could figure out why it's so important that we don't know his burial, right? Why is that important that he doesn't become a temple or a ritual, right? We don't want him to become deified. Remember, he's the anti-Paro. We've been seeing that throughout Sefer Devarim. Now, what I find a little funny about this pasuk is that it tells us exactly where he's buried and then says we don't know where he's buried. You couldn't get more specific. It's like he dies over here, he's buried over here, and no one knows where he's buried. Well, obviously they knew where he was buried.
Well, they don't know where his grave is. There's
right, but it tells us, it's even giving us markers. It's right opposite Beit Peor. It's like strange. It almost goes out of its way to tell us where it is and then say it wasn't. Right? So perhaps, right, the narrator is speaking to a later audience that doesn't know where he's buried. In other words, the people who lived then knew exactly where he was buried because they buried him. They're the ones who were part of the funeral procession, and they knew exactly where he was buried. And then that information was lost. And maybe the narrator here is saying, don't go looking for it. It's not important, right? It's on the other side of the Yarden. The fact that you don't know where it is doesn't matter, because it's not about his body. It's literally that previous slide I just showed you. Morasha Kihilat Yaakov. It's his morasha. It's his inheritance. It's what he taught you. It's the text. That's what lives on, not his body. So it's a message for us, I think, reading it today. The psukim continue with, okay, hold on, let me get this open here. Umoshe ben Mea ve'esrim shana, and he was 120 years old b'moto. Velo kahata eno velo naslecho, and his eyes didn't dim, right? And his strength never left him. Now, did Moshe die before his time or in the right time? In other words, did he die now because he's being punished? On the one hand, it said he's 120 years old. That's a nice round, complete number. It sounds like he lived a full life. As we know today, we always say, Ad mea ve'esrim shana, may you live to 120 years old. That's the goal, right? So we have this image of yes, he died exactly when he was supposed to die. On the other hand, if he died before his eyes were dim or before he lost his strength, what's the imagery there? What does it sound like to you?
It was before his time.
Yeah, he had so much more in him, right?
Yeah.
Come on, Moshe, you were so capable. You had all this strength. You could have gone more. Your life was cut short. He's not described as an old person. And that implies that he's being killed prematurely. And throughout Sefer Devarim, Moshe keeps saying that I am not allowed to enter the land because of you guys. Lema'anchem, ba'averchem. He's constantly blaming them. Why he's blaming them for what, we don't know. It's all very vague. But he clearly views himself as someone who can't live any longer because of something else, because of something external. Because someone isn't allowing him, right? God isn't letting him live any longer. But maybe we're reading this wrong. Maybe it's not in either or, right? He's not being punished. He must die now, even though he was capable of living longer, for the sake of the people, because he is not the right leader. Change is important, even when the leader is qualified to lead. And I think maybe that's what the pasuk is telling us. Yes, he could lead if he needed to, but he can't because he's not the right person. And
the variation we have on that is the limited term of presidents, and
exactly,
except for monarchy, there's a limited term.
Exactly. Now, who wrote about his death? Well, we this whole time have been explaining that there's this anonymous narrator, right? So for us, we could easily say, okay, this narrator who introduced Sefer Devarim in the very beginning is now writing the conclusion at the very end. And he is writing about Moshe's death. And we said that he probably lives hundreds of years later, after the conquest of the land, after he has a lot of historical perspective, because he could say with certainty, Pasuk Yud, V'lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe, asher yadeo Adonai panim apanim. Right? No one else was like Moshe. So you have to live really far after Moshe to say that there never was another leader like Moshe. A more traditional reader of the text, who believes that every word here was authored by Moshe, has a problem, because Moshe couldn't have written about his own death. So the Gemara tries to solve this by saying that Moshe wrote it either in Ruach HaKodesh, that God on the mountain tells him to write down these words. There's a beautiful image also that he writes it with his own tears, right? It's a very powerful image that he's sitting there writing it about his own death. There's also an idea that maybe Yehoshua wrote it. which doesn't really make sense because Yehoshua is referenced here in the third person. So, that wouldn't make so much sense. But for us, I think the plain meaning reading is how we've been reading it the whole time. That here we see the narrator again, who's wrapping up the book and saying, I've now compiled all of Moshe's speeches and put them into one spot for you guys to have as a text. Wouldn't it have been nice to have them see Bnei Israel enter the land now? Like, don't you wish we could see like the next chapter? Why not finish the story? Come on, just put in 2 more psukim. And the next day, Yehoshua went and they crossed the Yarden, ... and they did everything that Moshe told them to do. It's kind of like a cliffhanger, right? But it can't end that way. It can't, because this book, Sefer Devarim, is not a story. It's not a narrative. It's a book about law. And therefore, it has to end with the death of the lawgiver. That's an important way to end, because this is all about Moshe's Torah.
Why?
Because I think the whole idea that Moshe has been saying is that here's the Torah, and I've given, and don't add, and don't subtract, and don't change. And now Moshe's death is going to signify the end of the Torah. It's there, it's done. And now you just have to take it and go with it. It's kind of almost irrelevant what happens after. Do they go in? Do they not go in? How fast does it take? It doesn't really matter, because the text, the law, has been completed. And we need to end with Moshe's death. So I hope that I have succeeded in showing you that Sefer Devarim is a really unique book in the Torah, right? It's philosophical. It's about political philosophy and moral philosophy and theology. And it really grapples with the big question in life of what is it that God wants of us? And no other book in the Torah does it quite the same way that Sefer Devarim does it. So next time someone says, oh, Devarim is just a repeat of the Torah, say, no, absolutely not. It is radical, it's innovative, it's rich with all of these new ideas. And I would love to hear your thoughts and things that you've learned from Sefer Devarim in the next 1 minute that we have. Whoever needs to leave can leave. I know I went over my time.
We have to do it while standing on one foot.
If you can hear me.
Okay, I'll give you a few minutes. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere.
1 minute, Sarah, it was a fascinating set of lectures, clear, coherent, concise, insightful, and toda rabba.
Thank you.
Toda rabba, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone. It was really my pleasure learning with this group. You guys were
Thank you.
also thought-provoking, pushed me, asked great questions. It was a pleasure. It was a lot of fun for me.
Be well.
I would just like to conclude, Sarah, by saying that your last words about Sefer Devarim, that it is rich and insightful and fresh. I think those same words apply not just to Sefer Devarim, but to your teaching as well.
Thank you.
Your
Thank
teaching
you.
has
Very
been
kind.
rich, insightful, and fresh. And I'm conscious of the fact that Ktsat Shebach B'fanav, we have a tradition from our sages that you are only supposed to say a small amount of a person's praise in front of them, lest that you embarrass them. So I hope I'm not going to embarrass you.
That's
but
enough. You can stop there.
in so many ways, this was a perfect example of a course of what I was dreaming of at the inception of the Shah Learning Center. Something fascinating, engaging, and truly just having us all there on this incredible journey to do new learning and see a book that we're familiar with, but see it in a new way and have us literally riveted to the edge of our seats. You're an exceptional teacher, and you have enhanced for all of us, I speak on behalf of all of us, but I believe it's true, you've enhanced for all of us our appreciation of Sefer Devarim. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. That is very kind.
You.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
this is coming, and you'll excuse me for doing this in public. what are we learning with you next?
Okay, we'll talk after the summer.
Okay.
We'll talk.
Thank you. This
Thank
was
you.
Very
amazing.
good. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
Early Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Be well. Thank you.